Ever applied for a job? You know the feeling. That sense that the whole thing is, well, kind of arbitrary, maybe even unfair. You spend hours perfecting your resume, prepping for interviews, and then crickets. It's so frustrating. And guess what? You're not imagining things. The system really is broken in some fundamental ways. So let's start with a question about that very first step.
So let's just get right to the heart of it with this question. Are recruiters actually better than a simple coin flip when they look at your resume? It's a bold question, I know, but a really fascinating study from the tech interview platform interviewing.io decided to find out. They wanted to know if a recruiter's judgment is based on real skill and expertise, or if it's basically just chance.
But before we even get to the answer, think about this. That same study, it found that the median time a recruiter spends looking at a single resume is just 31 seconds. That's it, 31 seconds. All your years of work and experience judged in less time than it takes to decide what to watch on Netflix. These are huge, career-defining decisions being made in a flash.
And that brings us to the shocking conclusion of the whole experiment. When you actually measure it against how well the candidates did in real interviews, a recruiter's decision was barely better than a coin flip. Seriously, if this was a test in school, it would be a flat-out failing grade. So what on earth's going on? Why are experienced professionals struggling so much to spot talent? It's not about them not trying hard enough. It's about the weird ways our brains are wired. A huge part of the answer lies in something called the bias blind spot. See, all of our brains use these little mental shortcuts, or cognitive biases, to make quick judgments. The problem is, in hiring, those shortcuts can lead to huge mistakes. So let's dive into the psychological traps that even the most well-meaning interviewers fall into all the time. Okay, so first up, we've got confirmation bias. An interviewer forms an impression of you in just a few seconds. Maybe because they like the university you went to, or they recognize a company you worked for. Then, without even realizing it, they spend the entire rest of the interview just looking for evidence that confirms that first impression. If they got a good vibe, they'll ask you questions that let you shine. If not, they'll start digging for problems. They're not looking for the best person anymore, they're just looking to prove their own gut feeling right. And this often works hand in hand with another tricky one, the halo effect. This is where one single positive thing, like you seem really confident, or you went to a top-tier school, casts this glowing halo over everything else about you. The interviewer just automatically assumes you must also be brilliant, organized, and a great leader, even if there's zero evidence of that. That halo can be so bright that it completely blinds them to major red flags, like you don't actually have the skills to do the job. But here's the kicker. What happens when you actually ask HR professionals about these biases? Well, one study did just that. And it turns out HR pros are great at spotting bias in everyone else. They consistently rated their average colleague as way more biased than they were themselves. This is the bias blind spot in action. We all think we're the objective ones, which is exactly what makes us so vulnerable, because we don't bother to second-guess our own judgments.
So if our brains are wired for these kinds of shortcuts, what's triggering them? Well, you'd be shocked at how fast it all happens. Which brings us to snap judgments and the incredible power of just the first few seconds.
There's this incredible concept in social psychology called thin slices. Groundbreaking research showed that people make these powerful, lasting judgments about others based on just a few seconds of their nonverbal behavior. In an interview, that means the way you walk in, your handshake, your posture. These tiny little moments create a first impression that, because of confirmation bias, can literally dictate the entire rest of the conversation.
And this creates a really terrible catch-22 for a lot of job candidates. A study found a direct link between having high interview anxiety and something researchers called deceptive impression management, which is basically just a fancy way of saying faking it. When people are super anxious, they're way more likely to do things that come across as inauthentic or even dishonest. Not because they are dishonest, but because they're just trying to cope with this crippling fear of being judged.
So what are interviewers actually picking up on in those thin slices? Well, often, it's the exact symptoms of anxiety. One survey showed the top so-called mistakes that create a bad impression are things like not making enough eye contact, not smiling, or fidgeting. An anxious person might do all of these things without even thinking, but an interviewer can easily read it as this person is bored, or they're hiding something. All based on a split-second judgment. So the interview's over, but the anxiety? Not so much. For way too many people, what comes next is maybe the most maddening part of the whole modern job search. Just absolute silence. Welcome to the wonderful world of ghosting culture. Get this, a recent report revealed a truly staggering number. 8 out of 10 hiring managers admit that they've ghosted a job candidate.
That means just cutting off all communication, no explanation, leaving people just hanging, wondering what in the world happened. That's from the company side. But what does it feel like to be on the receiving end?
Well, the impact is huge. According to the 2024 Greenhouse Candidate Experience Report, 61% of job seekers have been ghosted after an interview. And this kind of disrespectful behavior is on the rise, jumping 9 percentage points in just a few months. It's a total breakdown in basic communication. So why? Why is this happening so much? A big reason is just the sheer volume. As Ed Huang from Resume Genius points out, AI tools have made it ridiculously easy for people to just spam companies with applications. Recruiters are completely drowning. Their workload shot up by 26% in just one quarter. Now that's an explanation for sure, but it's not really an excuse. And ironically, the same AI tech that's fueling the problem is also being sold as the ultimate solution. And that leads us to the really complicated role of artificial intelligence in all of this. It's helping to create the application overload, but it's also being pushed as this amazing tool for fair, efficient hiring. So what is it? Is AI the problem, or is it the solution?
Let's look at a quick cautionary tale. For years, this big hiring platform called HireVue used AI to analyze a candidate's facial expressions and their tone of voice in video interviews to predict if they'd be a good employee. But in 2019, a privacy group, Epic, filed a formal complaint calling it pseudoscience, basically a form of digital phrenology, and said it was totally unfair. Under all that pressure, HireVue eventually announced in 2021 that they were ditching the facial analysis part completely, which was a huge admission that the tech was deeply flawed.
So you can see the dilemma, right? On one hand, AI can create application spam and just amplify human biases on a massive scale. But on the other hand, remember that study we started with? They found a simple AI model was actually more accurate than human recruiters at judging resumes. So AI has the potential to screen people more fairly and take some of the pressure off recruiters that leads to things like ghosting. The tech itself isn't good or bad, it's all about how we decide to use it.
Okay, so the process is full of bias, anxiety, and just plain silence. It sounds pretty bleak, I know. But here's the good news. We don't need some futuristic AI to fix this mess. The science behind how to hire people fairly and effectively has been around for decades. So let's talk about a better way.
So what do candidates actually want? What do they think is fair? Well, a huge analysis found a really clear pattern. People highly favor methods that they see as directly connected to the actual job, like work samples and real interviews. They're way less enthusiastic about abstract things like personality tests. The takeaway is pretty simple. For candidate fairness looks a lot like the real job. This all leads us to the gold standard for hiring, the structured interview. And look, this isn't complicated, it's just disciplined. It means, first, you figure out the key skills you actually need. Second, you ask every single candidate the same exact questions. Third, you grade their answers using a consistent scoring guide, not just your gut feeling. And finally, you actually train your interviewers to use the system and to be aware of their biases. And the results? They're huge. Study after study shows this structure slashes bias, it increases diversity, and it does a much better job of predicting who's actually going to succeed. And critically, candidates feel the process is more fair. When you combine that structure with just timely feedback, just telling people yes or no, you create a process that actually treats human beings with respect. Fixing hiring doesn't always mean some massive revolutionary change. Sometimes it's about small, simple things. Remember that Interviewing.io study? They found that when recruiters spent just 15 extra seconds on a resume, going from about 30 seconds to 45, their accuracy at picking good candidates jumped by 34%. It's just a powerful reminder that the best cue for biased, snap judgments is to just slow down and be a little more thoughtful. So all of this leaves us with one final big question. The evidence is crystal clear. Structured interviews work. Feedback is critical. Just slowing down helps. The science of fair hiring has been here for years. So the real question isn't about what we should be doing, it's about why we aren't all doing it. Why is there such a massive gap between knowing what's right and what actually happens every day in the world of work? That's the question I'll leave you with.